as a young person, I was very interested in politics, in American politics, and also the Third World. I was very interested in India, actually, in my teens. It was still a major colonial movement. I got interested in Africa because I actually went there. I did this in a non-scholarly form originally. I went to a youth congress that happened to be held in Africa, and I decided, okay, I would focus on Africa as the zone of my intellectual activity, and I did that for some 10, 15, 20 years. At a certain point, I realized that I was, in my own phrase, running after the headlines, and that didn't seem to me to be very sensible. And I had a bad idea, which turned out to be serendipitously good. My bad idea was, if these are new nations, they must be following the same pattern as earlier new nations. And who are the earlier new nations? I decided, well, that must be England and France and other countries in the 16th century. So I better go back and look at them in order to understand Africa. Well, when I went back and looked at them, of course, I began to realize that the whole way of thinking about this was wrong, and that developed into beginning to write the modern world system, see it as a world system. So initially I thought I was engaged in changing the unit of analysis and of doing a sort of historical sociology of this system. I then discovered, as I began to present myself, that I was attacked, often not on empirical grounds. People wouldn't say, well, you're wrong in your description of this or that, not in any important way. They would say, your methodology is wrong. It's not disprovable hypotheses. They would give me a kind of Popperian critique. You don't have specified theories, etc. So I began to realize that I had to tackle the epistemological questions. I also began to realize that I had to look into the varied institutional structures, like households, for example, like structures of knowledge. So that got me moving into more and more and more domains, but specifically it moved me from just looking at the modern world system as a sort of historical system into the issue of genesis, which I've written about, and collapse. And then at some point, having been influenced by Braudel on the longue durée, I was influenced by Prigogine on the sciences of complexity and the concepts of bifurcation. I discovered, first time I heard Prigogine speak, and I didn't even know who he was at that point in time, I said, my God, these are ideas that are expressing what I have been feeling, but I didn't know how to express them. And I felt an immediate resonance, and so I began to study all this. And I now feel I use it a lot. So I'm concerned with the collapse of the current world system, and therefore, at the same time, the collapse of the structures of knowledge that's underlying that. That moved me towards the project which became that of the Gulbenkian Commission on the Restructuring of the Social Sciences, which was an attempt to analyze how social science came to be the way it was, where it was going, and where it might be going better. And so presently, what am I writing about? Well, on the one hand, I'm not writing really very much about Africa anymore, and because that's gotten absorbed into writing about, I'm still continuing the attempt to describe what happened historically to the capitalist world economy. I've only written 3 volumes of that. I'm into the 4th volume, be at least 5. And I have been writing constantly and regularly now about what's going on in the present moment, why it isn't globalization but transition to a new world system, and that I've been discussing with you. And I have been writing about what's going on in the world of knowledge, and I've been discussing that with you, the collapse, the breakdown of the two cultures, the fight against it, and so forth, the reorganization that would come as a consequence. So I have to do all these things simultaneously. Well, everybody else has to do all these things simultaneously, but I'm describing my own itinerary, and of course 68 did play an important role personally for me, because I was involved in it as a young professor at Columbia University, and I was very active during the events. But 68, I guess, helped purge the last of the liberal premises which I had imbibed in my own education, which everybody else had imbibed. And since it was such an anti-centrist liberal revolution, it opened my eyes to how deep the assumptions were buried in me as well as in other people, and I have just tried to work that out more explicitly in my own thinking since. So 68 was important, and the current collapse, I think of it as a collapse. I've tried to explain that in Utopistics and in other books, is preoccupying me. Therefore, the question not only what is happening, but what to do about what is happening.